Hi, beautiful souls. It's Tan back here again today with you on this Astrology, Human Design, and Gene Keys channel. And today I'm here with you with a transmission of Gene Key 22, Human Design Gate 22, which is the zodiac sign of Pisces. So before we get started today, I just want to let you know that if you're interested in getting a reading from me or anyone on my team, do head over to our website, tanastrology.com. I'll provide a link to that in the description box below and also up above, and you can see what kind of reading works for you because we have a variety of different readings available now. And yeah, if you'd like to grab one, then go ahead. We'd love to be your guides on your self-discovery journey. So I have been waiting for the right moment to channel and share this transmission with you guys because Richard Rudd has provided a very in-depth and absolutely divine transmission of Gene Key 22 in his book of the Gene Keys. And so it's taken me a while to finally feel into this and to be sharing this with you. And even as I'm sharing this with you, I don't feel like I fully embodied or understood it at a level of, we can say, certainty. And of course, nothing's really certain in life, right? But just listen, as you're listening to this, of course, have your own discernments and leave any questions in the comments below, and anything that may need to be researched on your own or felt on your own or embodied by yourself is more important than maybe what I say in this video. So, and I decided to wear white today and be in my clean white room because I feel like a swan when I'm wearing this dress, which is the dream arc vision keyword of this particular Gene Key 22. So, let me give you guys a quick overview of this Gene Key first. So Gene Key 22 moves from the shadow of dishonor to the gift of graciousness to the siddhi of grace. They also call it grace under pressure, and it spans the archetype of Pisces from 17 degrees of Pisces to 37 degrees of Pisces. In the codon ring, this is part of the ring of divinity, and it's associated with the amino acid proline. In the I Ching hexagram, this hexagram is mountain over fire, also called grace, purifying and alchemizing the shadow through patient presence. So beautiful. The dream arc totem fear key is the piranha, the life key animal is the deer, and the vision keyword is the swan. The programming partner of this archetype is Human Design Gene Key 47, and that's Virgo archetype, and I've already made a video on that a few weeks ago, so I highly recommend that you check out the video that I made on the programming partner as well, because the programming partner does offer a balancing energy point to this particular archetype. In Human Design, this Gene Key falls into gate 22, which is located in the solar plexus and connects to gate 12 in the throat through a channel called the channel of openness or the channel of passion. So I want to start looking at this Gene Key from diving a little bit into the bird, which is a swan. I don't want to go into too much detail there because there's a lot to say in this video. This is probably going to be a really long video, so I'm going to keep the bird as short as possible. So the word swan itself is derived from an Indo-European word that actually means sing. So there is something musical, graceful associated with the swan and this archetype. And I don't know if you guys have seen the way that a swan lands. My first thought was that a swan landing in a lake is so graceful. Like when you watch other aquatic birds like ducks or geese land, they look kind of clumsy and cute. But a swan, when it's landing, looks gracefully beautiful. There's a certain poise that comes with the way that a swan lands. Of course, the swan is a traditional symbol of beauty and grace in ancient Greece and was sacred to the goddess Aphrodite as well as Apollo, the god of music. And of course, Aphrodite was the goddess of love. People believe that the swan sang a sweet and beautiful song when people died. So there is actually a little bit of darkness associated with the swan symbolism as well. Because although they are a symbol of, love, devotion, romance, beauty, elegance, and grace, there are also certain cultures Especially I think it is in Latin. In the story of Queen Leda, she was actually raped by Zeus, who appeared in a swan form. And this results in the birth of the twins Castor and Pollux, who make up the twin signs of Gemini. So, and then there's also the story of the Swan Maiden, which is a tale about how a woman was forced to marry, keep house, and bear children for a mortal man. So she's a supernatural woman doing this for a mortal man who holds the key to her imprisonment. But then she eventually escapes and she is able to be transformed into a swan. So there's these darker themes of violence and bondage associated with the swan as well. But besides from that, the swan is a symbol of love because swans do mate for life. And when one partner of the swan dies, the other partner would mourn the death for a pretty long time. And some swans even choose to spend the rest of their lives alone rather than seeking another mate. So, and swans as a child, when they were first babies, they're considered like ugly ducklings, but they somehow managed to transform into more beautiful, elegant birds. So there's this theme of transformation associated with the swan, as well as death and darkness, but also beauty, elegance, and grace, which is all very much associated with Gene Key 22, which is what we're going to talk about today. If any of you guys have this gene key, feel free to comment below and share with me what are your impressions of this and how you embody this in your life. Gene Key 22 is very dear to my heart because it is my midheaven. So a lot of the things that you see in the public platform, like my YouTube, for example, is probably going to be a manifestation of Gene Key 22, although I do have to say that this is not really what you see in real life because the midheaven is always that point that's about our public persona. But I have my midheaven at 19 degrees of Pisces, so it falls into gate 22, Gene Key 22. So if you have this particular archetype, you might be somebody that has been through a certain amount of suffering in your life. And depending on how you deal with that suffering, you may be seen as somebody that is a bit scandalous if you deal with it in a negative way, because there tends to be this tendency of emotional projection and sometimes even violence to other people. If you're not dealing with some of the harder pains of your life, you're just projecting that into the outside world. But if you're dealing with these kinds of darker themes in your life in a more positive way, which means expression, like feeling into your feelings and expressing them creatively in all various forms of creative outlet, is associated with Gene Key 22, you could be seen as somebody who is graceful because you're able to be kind in the face of adversity. You're able to turn your shameful things into beauty, and that is very respected and very graceful. You're going to be somebody who loves to listen to music, maybe loves to sing, maybe loves to do some kind of creative artistic work. But a lot of it is associated with music. So if you find yourself needing to listen to some music every day, that's a manifestation of Gene Key 22. And what I've noticed with people who have Gene Key 22 is that they tend to not be too showy in the way that they are. Like, they are expressive, but they tend to be expressive with a certain amount of poise and elegance and grace in that expression, if that kind of makes sense. Which grace I associate with being able to have some amount of restraint coupled with expressiveness. So an expressiveness that has some amount of restraint because it's taking into consideration and caring for other people, in the around you. This is graceful. There's also something about people who have this archetype of the 22 that they're very good listeners as well, because like I said, they need to listen to something. So they're very good at holding space for other people. People might come to them to share their deepest, darkest stories of their lives, and Gene Key 22 will sit there and listen and hold space. So this is a very gifted person in terms of holding space. All right, so I'm going to jump into the shadow of Gene Key 22, which is called dishonor. So in order to understand this Gene Key, I want to give you guys a foundational analysis, which is based on Richard Rudd's book of the Gene Keys and what he describes there. Okay, I'm going to start by saying to you guys that this gene key is associated with the law of karma. It has a very tight connection to the law of karma. So what I'm going to say about this is that when you are so attuned to the law of karma, you understand that every thought, every action, every emotion that is manifested has a equal consequence that comes around to you. Even if it's just a thought or an emotion, it comes back to you. Because if you really think about it, right, when you have a certain feeling, it's already affecting you. When you have a certain thought, that thought is not just going to have an effect in the world and other people, but it's already affecting the way you think. Karma can be that instant. But there is also this idea here that everything that happens to you in your life is stored and remembered and collected into the Akashic records, if you've heard of that, the Akashic records of humanity. And so that's why this archetype is very much associated with holding space, because it's able to hold, it remembers everything. And so the theory of involution and evolution is also very much associated with this, which means that your soul descends into this physical form through a process called involution. So the soul comes to earth and gets a physical body. That's involution. And that is part of it is associated with gene key 22. And there is also the evolution, which is us in a human form, going through life, transforming ourselves so that we return back into the soul, so that our soul is released once we die. And how that soul is released once we die is dependent on our actions in this life and the karma that we create in this lifetime. So this is the foundation of Gene Key 22, and it's very important to understand this because a lot of what is being talked about is related to this. I really do feel like the programming partner of Gene Key 22 has a lot to do with the evolution phase of things, and so they're very much linked. But sometimes we also look at Gene Key 55, which is the sister gene key to Gene Key 52. It's the other master gene key as also being that phase of evolution as well. But in this respect, we might look at the 47 as the evolution phase, the transmutation phase, of how we work with the darker things in our life to transmute karma. So in order for us to involute, so come back, it's not even a word, to involute into the human form from that, soul, that pure soul, we have a choice, and we can have an awareness of how we want to come back into this form. How purified will our soul be when it descends back into the human form? And in order to purify, to have them, and this is not something that you'll do like in one lifetime. This is something that is related to reincarnation and can happen over many, many lifetimes as you begin to purify your soul, we can say. And the process of purifying your soul has to do, this purifying your soul seems like a really, I'm not sure if that's even the correct word to use here, but we'll just use that word for now. That process involves transmuting your suffering. So Gene Key 22 is always linked to the 47. You can't escape transmutation. And the way to transmute suffering, as described in the Gene Keys book by Richard Rudd, is through this becoming, we can say through becoming or embodying what is called the Great Mother. So the Great Mother is born and created out, she's a feminine energy, is born and created out of 3 masculine energies. These 3 masculine energies are associated with Christ, Buddha, and Thoth. Thoth is a representation of developing or transmuting suffering into divine will. Buddha is a representation of transmuting suffering into wisdom. And Christ is a transmutation, is a representation of the transmutation of suffering into love. So when you're able to transmute your suffering into these three things, you begin to embody the Great Mother. So what happens next is the way that, so let's say you've done these things, right? But through various different lifetimes. What happens next is the soul coming into the body will begin to become more purified. And what we have to look at next, and feel free to skip this part if you want, but I might use some of these terminologies later on in the video. So, but if you already know about this theory, then you may skip it. So this is a theory of the different bodies. There are specifically 7 bodies that we have as human beings. And these bodies can also be looked at in terms of aura. So there's like different layers of aura that we have as human beings. The first layer is the physical body, which of course we know we can touch the physical body. Next, another layer that we have on top of that is the astral body, which has to do with our emotions. And the physical body has to do with our DNA and our health. The astral body has to do with our emotions, desire, and emotional impulses. And then we have the third body, which is the mental body, that has to do with the way that we think. And sometimes the mental body is associated and very sensitive to the collective mental bodies, because our thoughts are in this resonant frequency with the collective thoughts, we can say. And then fourth body, we have the causal body, which is a higher frequency, a higher octave of the physical body. And the causal body is important when we're talking about Gene Key 22, because this is what is also termed as the soul. So when I say the soul, sometimes it is referred to as the causal body, which stores a lot of the memories of things and actions and things that happen to you in this lifetime. It goes into the causal body, or the soul. And the causal body is what is involved in evolution. When you die, that's what is released, and is what is involved in involution. It's what comes back to Earth when you are being born. And after that, we have the Buddhic body, which is the higher octave of the astral body. And then we have the Atmic body, which is the higher octave of the mental body. And then we have the Monadic body, which is the primal essence of divine consciousness. And they also look at the Atmic body as the siddhi state. So when you look at the gene keys and you have these different siddhi states, they are manifested when you're at your Atmic body or in touch with the Atmic body. Okay, so we've got that established now. So the next thing I want to share with you guys is what is called the Bardo states. So a Bardo state is what happens when you are transitioning from death into the other realm. This is when you die and your body begins to kind of separate. This is when you're in a Bardo state. So when these different bodies, right, that we talked about previously, they begin to separate, especially the causal body that's being taken out, and the astral body, the emotions is disconnected from the physical body, you go into Bardo state. And that's why emotions become very intense during this Bardo state, when you're like transitioning from life into death, because there is no longer a physical body for those emotions to attach to, so they can kind of go wild. And sometimes I like to look, I think, in terms of medical terminology, I feel like this Bardo state may be linked to a state called terminal delirium. That's the right word there, where you sometimes begin to see creatures, and sometimes demons or angels, on your bed with you or around you right before you pass over to the other side. It's a manifestation of this state of being. So the reason why I'm talking about the Bardo states is that this is when the causal body, the soul, leaves the body. And the causal body, or the soul, takes with it only the higher energy frequencies from your life. And it discards and leaves behind lower energy states of being. So it takes with it like purity, we can say. The soul takes purity with it and leaves behind suffering, darkness, and other things that you haven't fully processed in your life. And that gets stored in the collective junk DNA. So the negative karma, you could say, circles around from generation to generation. The more that you haven't purified your suffering or you haven't transmuted your suffering, the more you are in a state of dishonor, the shadow of this frequency, the more darkness remains in humanity. The more that you manage to transmute some of your suffering, the more pure the soul becomes and the causal body becomes as it goes back into the cosmos. So what happens in a state of involution is that the causal body comes back to Earth and wants to find a physical body again, right? And depending on the essence, the purity of that causal body, it will be landing in the environment, so the body, the physical body, that is suitable for its level of frequency. It will attract that. And sometimes, I don't know, how this actually works, of course, but sometimes it is also said that the purer the causal body is, the more that it's going to attract to itself a physical body that has more negative karma, more suffering, because it is able to have more compassion and is able to hold space for a lot more. So this hit me hard when I was reading this part of Gene Key 22, because if you feel, again, any of you guys out there feel like your life is filled with pain and suffering and hardship, that's your gift. You are coming into this world with a soul so purified that it is able to hold all of that and is able to choose the path of compassion and love for that physical body, that frequency that you have attracted. And your choice is to not choose the path of victimization, but to choose the path of your higher self and to offer yourself and that hardship that you have in your life compassion, and to offer the people around you compassion and kindness. Because when you're in a state of victimization, that is when you cause more harm and more pain to yourself and to the people around you. So I think that touched me, because it's just, I feel it. I feel you guys, All right, so now I want to talk about the actual shadow of dishonor and how that may actually manifest in your life and what that actually means to be in the shadow state of dishonor. So this means that you are not doing the, I quote, work, because I don't like to look at these, kind of things that you do with the gene keys as actual work, but it's more about embodiment and embracing yourself and loving yourself and accepting yourself. So the work that you may not be doing when you're in the shadow of dishonor means that you are not aware. First of all, you are not aware of the various things that I just mentioned. So you're not aware of the fact that your soul, the things I just mentioned. So you're not aware of the fact that there's karma, and that karma is going to come back to you. There's negative consequences to every action, and that this soul needs to be purified. And you're not aware of the karma, the negative karma that you leave behind once you leave the physical body. So there's just no awareness there, first of all. But of course, if you're watching this video, you have a choice now to be aware, right? So when you're not aware of this, or sometimes when you're aware, but you're still kind of not really doing the work, right? You may be unable to process your emotions. So instead of sitting with your suffering and your pain and the heavier parts of being human, which is your emotions, you project that onto other people. And sometimes this can be very aggressive and very violent. So if somebody angers you, for example, you may feel that 100 times more than what you should actually feel, because there's a lot going on inside of you. And instead of feeling the anger inside of yourself, you will lash back onto that person just to not feel. There may also be, in the shadow state of dishonor, denying human pleasures and desires, like sexual desires, sexual pleasures. These things may be considered by you as shameful. And sometimes I like to look at Gene Key 22 and the shadow of it being associated with, British society or European society in the Victorian era, we can say, or like in the 1800s or in the 1700s, where everything had to be very proper, and women could be ruined, if they had a sexual were engaged in some kind of sexual activity before they were married, because they had to remain pure, when they married. And on the surface, everything looks very proper, and people care a lot in those days about their image. But behind that is a very, very repressed desires and emotions and feelings that there's no space. There's nobody to hold space for that in the society in those days. So that's what I sometimes associate this with. So when you dishonor yourself in this way, when you are denying yourself of sexual pleasures and desires, and when you are projecting emotions onto others rather than feeling them, you're actually causing yourself more and more suffering rather than giving yourself the peace. Because every action, every thought, and every emotion comes around. There's a consequence to all of them. So I think I've pretty much gone through the shadow of dishonor. Let's move to the gift of graciousness for this archetype now. So the gift of graciousness means that whatever you do in your life, you always consider the feelings of others. You always respect the feelings of others. This is what it means, graciousness. And because of that, you are able to sort of be very socially gifted, in a sense that everybody loves you. Everybody wants to be around you because you always care about how they feel. And this caring of how other people feel is not about being sensitive. It's not like Gene Key 19, that's like very sensitive and I can feel into what you're feeling. And so therefore, I have to be very gentle with that. With Gene Key 22, it's more about compassion. This is about having compassion that the other person in front of you is another human being. They have thoughts and emotions and feelings and experiences just like you have. Of course, different experiences, but pretty much similar path to what you have. And that you were united and whole. Your souls were together, united before you came to this physical body. And that's the graciousness. You have an ability, if you are the gift of graciousness, to be able to impact other people's emotions. You have a direct emotional impact to them. You can say things and make them cry and touch them at their heart and in their soul. You can touch people's soul and you can touch them in their emotions. There is also a great ability to be kind to others. And when we talk about kindness here, we mean that even when somebody is showing you their negatively charged emotions, so when others are projecting their negatively charged emotions onto you, whether that is verbal or physical or whatever that is, you are able to turn that or help them. Well, I don't want to use the word help here, but you're able to impact them in return in a way that turns those negatively charged emotions into positively charged emotions. And if you're listening to this, don't fall into the martyr syndrome here, because that's not always possible with everyone. And if you're not able to do that for somebody, You gotta leave that situation. You gotta have that honor for yourself and leave them be and not perpetuate their negatively charged emotions through a state of codependency that is dishonor to them and dishonor to yourself. So if that happens, you gotta leave. But you have that capability of being able to do that. You have a gift and you're very, sort of attuned to the arts, to music, to theater, because you have a deep desire and can express yourself very well through these various different artistic fields, because you're able to take all the emotions and the pain and everything that you felt inside and put it into art and creativity and music in a way that takes into consideration others' feelings. And I want to say that when you're at the gifts of graciousness, you're able to be kind to others, but not at the expense of repressing yourself, if that makes sense. So that means that you have to be able to work with discharging or releasing your own intense emotions first. So it's not about repressing your emotions for the sake of kindness, but it's about knowing that you can create a safe space for yourself to discharge and release your negative emotions so that you can come back to that other person and show them kindness. So I actually want to share an experience with you guys of this, illustrate how this had happened in my life. The other day, I got a message from someone, and they were telling me about some of the hardships that they're going through in their family, surrounding the themes of death. Not immediate family, but like their relatives. And the moment I heard that message, I felt a lot of emotions. I felt very intense. I felt a little bit violent. I felt like I wanted to lash out at that person and I wanted to say very nasty things to them because I felt like I hadn't processed my own grief. And this year has been a very intense year for me in terms of processing grief and coming to the acceptance of my father's death. It's only been like 7 months and I'm still in that process, right? And so the moment that it's triggered with that heaviness and that emotion that's coming from that other person, I just wanted to tell that person how mean they are. I just wanted to tell them that they were not caring about me, that they didn't care about how I felt, that, how could you share such a thing about yourself when you know that my father passed away earlier this year? That would have been a very mean thing to say in that scenario. And I tell ya, if this had happened like when I was in my early 20s or when I was in my teens, I would probably have just lashed out at that person. But this time, or at least nowadays, I chose to not respond. So I didn't respond to that person right away. And I took time for myself to feel into that. And when I did that, I found myself crying. So instead of lashing out and responding back to that person in the mean ways that I, maybe would have responded, I put away my phone and sat with how I was feeling. And when I sat down and gave myself space to feel into what was happening in this moment, I just cried. I was crying for an hour before I fell asleep that night. And as I was crying, all I could think of was that I missed my dad, and I thought about his face, and I thought about, the stages and the things he was going through last year, before he passed away. And then I cried and I cried and I cried. And I fell into my own suffering, but I held space for myself there to feel, and I fell asleep. And then I woke up the next day, and the intensity was gone. And I felt peaceful. And I'm not saying that this is the last time it's going to happen, because I know this has happened many times this year, and I'm very easily triggered, and I just cry out of the blue. But, it's a process and it has to happen, and I hold space for myself when that happens. But when I woke up that morning, at least for that day, I felt a little bit more peaceful. So I was able to respond back and send a message back to this person and showed compassion and kindness to their situation and what they were going through and hold space for them there. And so this is something that, Gene Key 22 has to learn to do for themselves, is to accept the way that they feel, is to accept the way that you feel in the moment that you feel it, so that you can show other people some kindness and some compassion, because we need more of that in the world. And so because you are able to do this kind of a work, you may be somebody that holds nothing back, especially the things that you're passionate about. Like, you can come across as a very passionate person in the world, and you will go for the things that your heart and your emotions take you, and you put your heart and your emotions and the fullness of it into everything you do. And that's why this makes for a great actor, a great singer, a great artist, a great writer, because you pour all of your emotions out there in your creations, and you're not afraid to do that, because you know that your suffering and your emotions will not kill you. Your emotions will not kill you. Right. So so when it comes to this archetype, when you are stepping into, the gifts of graciousness and the siddhi of grace, and like we've been talking about, purifying or transmuting your suffering, there are going to be specific wounds that may trigger you more than others. And to figure out which of these wounds is more triggering for you, that you may be suffering more from, you could be looking at your gene key hologenic profile, specifically at a sphere that is called the vocation sphere. That's part of the pearl sequence is called the vocation sphere. It's sometimes called the sphere of the deepest wound. And you want to look at the lines associated with that. You'll have a number, like gene key number, maybe it's like gene key 55, and line 1 to 6, whatever that might be. Those specific lines will indicate 6 specific wounds that exist within all humanity, and you will embody or have one of them stronger than the others. This may be part of the main suffering that's coming from here when we look deeper down. So the 6 core wounds of humanity are associated with the 7 sacred seals, which is an ancient teaching on the topic of, how we can achieve, how humanity can ascend to a higher plane together. That can happen when we work through these 7 seals. So there's 6 seals, and the 7th one is grace. The 7th one is Gene Key 22. But the first 6 seals are associated with the 6 wounds of humanity, and they are archetypally related to 6 gene keys. So if you haven't heard of this yet, I'm going to go through the 7 sacred seals for you. The first seal is the core wound of repression, line 1, and associated with gene key 40. So have a look at that in your chart. Like, have a look at the vocation sphere. Mine is line 6. So that's the core wound of separation. What is it for you? This will be your deepest suffering and something that you need to be transmuting in order to reach grace. And then we have the 7th seal, which is Gene Key 22, and that is grace itself. So let me go through what it actually means to be transmuting suffering with regards to these core wounds. So when you're looking at the first seal, which is the core wound of repression, we are looking at the physical body. So this is when your physical body is tense, stiff. This has to do with your actual DNA. There's, a level and layers of tension that's built up in your DNA, in your physical body, and this can lead to disease. And this is responsible for a lot of diseases on the planet. So in order to transmute repression, it's very easy. It is to relax. But a lot of people on our planet don't relax. And I like to associate this core wound with work and the world of employment and work and the hustle that we get ourselves into in order to survive and to make money and to work, and how we don't allow ourselves this balance, this work-life balance. And so work-life balance will be the number one thing, and incorporating more relaxation and ease into your life is associated with this particular core wound, and how you can transmute the suffering of repression into divine will, the grace of divine will. So with the second core wound, second seal, we have the core wound of denial. So denial is when you do not take responsibility for your own emotions and anger and your negative behavior. It comes from the fact that you're not aware and you don't even see that you're not taking responsibility for your own actions and your own emotions. So there's this blindness, we can say, to this core wound of denial. So to tap into the transmutation of this core wound is to see, is to allow yourself to see through. And that's omniscience. It's an ability to have farsightedness, to be able to see your situation for what it really is. So once you can actually see your own denial, you're no longer in denial, because denial is responsible for a lot of violence and sometimes like sexual violence that happens on earth as well. And in yourself, if you have this as your core wound, there might be tendencies for violence. But if you are in denial of that, it will continue. But the moment you see it, the moment you see that you're being violent, it's not possible. It's almost impossible for you to actually still be violent. Of course, we're not talking about here, psychological mental illnesses. We're talking about when you don't have those things. So the third core wound is the core wound of shame. So shame is when you do not see your own worth, when you feel worthless. So when you feel worthless, you may tend to fall into competitiveness, selfishness, greed, envy. You're envying other people because you don't see what you're worth. And so you are becoming greedy and you want to be like other people and you want more money. And this wound is responsible for human greed and the way we misuse money in the world. And so you can transmute this shame into universal love by loving yourself and allowing other people to love you and accepting love into your life. This is how you transmute shame into universal love. Accept yourself for all that you are, because feelings of worthlessness is coming from an inability to accept and love yourself, right? So the next wound is the wound of rejection. And rejection happens when we are setting up boundaries and creating territories in order to protect and defend ourselves, sometimes unnecessarily, from others. And there's this inability to wear your heart on your sleeve and around other people. And there's this hiding nature, which means that I feel like this wound is responsible for a lack of trust in the world. And it is also, of course, responsible for what is considered as poverty in the world here as well, because we hoard things, we defend ourselves, we use money, we don't share. So you can transmute this fear of rejection into epiphany. When you allow yourself to take certain risk in life and to trust in the unknown, trust is the key, right, to bringing down those walls and those barriers. Countries we've created countries in the world because we don't trust the person that's on the other side of the land. So we create these false barriers. And because of that, wealth is not being distributed equally. So the next core wound is guilt. And guilt is what is called karmic debt that exists between one person and another. Feeling like you owe something to somebody, or that the other person owes me something. It's like a debt, right? That you feel like the other person has on you and you have on another person. And so to be able to transmute guilt into forgiveness means to be able to forgive another person so that they no longer feel guilty. And because guilt is also responsible for war in the world. And with forgiveness, we can create more world peace. And sometimes you have to be the bigger person to start the forgiveness. And the last seal is the wound of separation. And this is when you feel separated from people in the world. You don't realize that we are all one and we are all united. There's no sense of this oneness. So what happens is it makes you seek for fulfillment outside of yourself. So that we don't experience our true nature. We don't look inwards. We look outside of ourselves for fulfillment. So you can transmute this feeling of separation into truth, specifically when you understand the absolute truth of the fact that we are all one and united. And so this wound of separation leads to indifference in the world. And so we can create less indifference in the world by understanding the universal truth or absolute truth of the oneness of everything. So these are the different sufferings and wounds that you may have to be working through a process of self-acceptance and self-love. And once you have done that, right, so we have these 6 wounds, which reaches to the 7th seal, which is grace. So once you work through these various wounds, grace will descend down upon you. And when grace descends down upon you, you may be going through a spiritual awakening. And spiritual awakenings comes in stages of, like, according to the Gene Keys, initiation stages. And these stages sometimes sound like they're a bit religious, but I like to look at these stages as stages of a relationship, your relationship with grace. Because as you will look through these stages, you'll see that they're very relational in their nature. These stages of spiritual awakening or spiritual initiation is what they call it, starts from the stages of birth to baptism, confirmation, matrimony, annunciation, communion, ordination, sanctification, and glorification of grace. So, like I said, they sound like stages of relationships to me, and you'll see why. So when you're going through spiritual awakening or spiritual initiation, the first stage is birth, which means that you are finally out of survival mode in your life. So once you've dealt with these various different wounds that we talked about, you come out of survival mode into... So survival mode, we would term as needing to feed your basic needs. So shelter, food, money, having enough of that is the survival stage. Once you've, worked through, because I said like the 6 wounds are related to these various different things that can be manifested in the world, like poverty or war and those kinds of things. Once you've gotten yourself past that, you've healed some of those wounds internally within yourself, you will reach a non-survival stage, which is the questioning of your spiritual self, the questioning of the soul. There will be this feeling of this fleeting glimpse of happiness. Like material things don't bring you happiness anymore, so you need to be getting in touch with the soul. So you are birthed out of selfishness, that's what they call it, into the natural human spirit of helpfulness and harmlessness. Pleasure is now being derived through the act of giving rather than taking, because you have enough for yourself. And I think it's important to note here that this first stage that comes after the survival stages, that survival stage is important and is necessary. Meaning that it's important for you to have the basic human needs in order to ascend to your taking care of your spiritual needs. So money is important in life. A home is important in life. Food, the basic things that you need, these more material things are important in order for you to reach that stage of wanting to get in touch with the soul, right? You cannot bypass that. That's spiritual bypass. You have to transcend that, which means to go through that, just like the Buddha. Like when the Buddha was reaching enlightenment, his first stage of his spiritual awakening journey was he was a prince and he had everything that he ever wanted. He, had food and he lived in a palace. He had women coming to him to give him sexual pleasures if he wanted them. But at some point he was like, I've had enough of this. What else is out there in the world? So even the Buddha himself went through this stage of the birth into spiritual awakening journey. So the second stage is called baptism. And so I like to look at the first stage as like when you're first falling in love, when you just met somebody new, you're birthing, a relationship, right? But the second stage, I feel, is when you are coming to terms with the reality of relationships. That's like your reality with your spiritual awakening journey. At first, it feels exciting. There's all this new thing that's happening. And now, at the second stage of baptism, some people may have a nervous breakdown or a mental breakdown because there's just a big shift and a change from the norms and the reality of what their life used to be into this new way of being that sometimes it's just so much, it's overwhelming, that there may be some kind of breakdown that happens. But yeah, this is like when your lower essences are becoming more refined so that you can raise your frequency. That's what's happening here. You're beginning to raise your frequency, right? So the next stage comes the stage of confirmation. And this is when you are being truly committed. This is when you are telling yourself, you're confirming to yourself, kind of like, when you begin to see in a relationship like someone's darknesses and some of their quirks, that's the baptism stage. And then you come to the confirmation stage and you're like, okay, I think I am going to actually stick with this person because I can work through some of their, because I'm able to work with and live with some of these person's quirks. So now I'm going to be committed to them. And that's when we get into the confirmation stage of things. You're aware of, that this is not an easy path, right? That this spiritual awakening is not an easy path, but you're willing to be committed and to work with it. And so we get to this confirmation stage. And this is when you solidify the fact that your lower self has to be sacrificed for you to reach your higher self. And so there's a lot of detachment that's happening here. Kind of like, when the Buddha was meditating and before he reached enlightenment, as he was meditating, he saw all of his karma and the sinful things that he's done in his life, flashing before him. And he had to be tested with regards to the strength of his ability to be detached from those sins. It was very tempting, for him to fall into his old patterns, but he was committed, right? The next stage is matrimony. So this is the marriage stage. This is a stage when the causal body, remember we talked about the causal body before? This is when the causal body is merged with the physical body. So there's this marriage that happens with the causal body and the physical body. You understand that this is what needs to happen. And so, this whole process was just to make sure that the causal body could be as refined as it could be so that it would be married to the right physical body and to accept that this is the path that has to come next. This is when we understand that our sexual energies can be used for creative purposes and that sexual energy is creative energy. And this is when you are in a state of wanting to offer a deep service to humanity. This is when there's this inside of you, a marriage of your opposites. So your masculine and your feminine are one inside of yourself. Your light and your dark are one inside of yourself. And it brings you greater harmony than ever before. And the next stage is the Annunciation, which is also called the pregnancy stage. So see, this is like a relationship stage. After you get married, then you begin to have kids. So at the stage of Annunciation, you are giving birth. This is a stage in which the Buddhic body, if you guys remember, the Buddhic body comes in and penetrates into the astral body, which is the emotional body, right? So we have this higher state, higher octave of the body coming into the emotional body, which is a very tantric phenomenon in nature. This is when there's this, I think maybe the right word here would be emotionally transformed. that might be a good word to use here, when your emotions reach a more tantric level. So there's this way in which you are able to move emotions in your body in and out as need be, where you can actually feel, within the physical body where these emotions are stored, where they're stuck, and you can kind of move and channel them around. Sometimes this is a stage where you're able to sublimate your sexuality into a more pure and spiritual essence. So when we talk about tantric sexuality, it's a really good practice at this stage of things where you're sitting with a partner and your energies are merged in almost like this kundalini snake-like way, and you're really feeling each other's energies and each other's emotions, but you're not releasing that into an orgasm because you are continuously loving. You're continuously loving each other, and tantric sex lasts longer, and you experience bliss longer and pleasure longer, and you're giving that to each other without ending it with an orgasm. Okay, the sixth initiation is the stage of communion. Communion is, according to Richard Rudd, the end of our evolution here on Earth. This is the true stage of enlightenment. This is a state of being in your atmic body, or the siddhi state of things, as mentioned previously. This is when the causal body begins to dissolve and severs the link between the lower bodies and the higher bodies. So this is when the soul actually dissolves. This is when the soul is released. And it is called communion because this is when you really are able to feel at one with the cosmos, with everything, with the divine. It is not when you're in this world, but when you are no longer here anymore. The 7th, 8th, and 9th initiations are called higher evolution initiations, which are things that we may not necessarily be feeling into in this lifetime, in this physical body. It is when the monadic body flows into the asmic body and the Buddhic bodies, right? Which, it has nothing to do with the lower bodies anymore, so we may not be really feeling into this. And it's really quite beyond human understanding. That's kind of what Richard Rudd says there. But I'm just curious as to, when I think about the future of humanity and, we are in a stage in humanity where, our bodies are always changing, right? We came from Neanderthals to what we are now. And it makes me think about the future, maybe I'm talking about thousands of years in the future and what the future might hold in terms of our bodies. And I feel like we may not even be in a physical body anymore. We may be living in another realm where our body is just light frequencies and we're interacting with each other in this light frequency. So I think it's quite, fascinating to just ponder on, but not too much, of course. So if you've, at a brief moment in your life, experienced grace descending upon you, and whether you have this gene key or not, I'm sure that at some point in your life, you've experienced that grace. And just like in my story that I told you, when I received the message a few days ago, I felt like that was grace descending upon me. And same for you guys. If you've ever had that brief moment of grace coming down upon you, you know that you've been touched by grace and that you always have access to that every day at 11:11. But yeah, that you always have access to grace. And grace is a kind heart, a forgiving heart, a divine feminine spirit that smiles in the face of adversity, as Richard Rudd says in his book. Allow yourself to smile in the face of adversity and love while you still can, and be loved while you still can. And remember that you are nothing but love. You've descended from love and purity, and that you are love and purity. I think that's going to be it for this video today. That was quite long. If you guys have anything that you want to share, discuss, questions to ask, how you're feeling, just comment below. And I love reading all of your comments. And I think that's going to be it for today, beautiful souls. And if you're interested in getting a reading, head over to my website, hannaastrology.com. Me and my team would be more than graceful and happy to do a reading for you guys. And that's it for today. Sending everybody lots of grace, of course, love.